"Your hair is distracting." That's what a teacher told a black girl before shaving her head bald. But what she didn't know, her father was a U.S. Army general. What would you do if this was your child? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that hit home. Imani walked into school that morning with a quiet pride. She had spent the evening before under the watchful eyes of her mother, carefully braiding her hair into intricate, colorful patterns. The braids were bold and vibrant, each strand telling a story of heritage and strength. She'd always loved the way they looked, how they framed her face like a crown, and today they felt like a declaration of her identity. She smiled as she made her way through the crowded hallways, feeling the eyes of her peers on her, some admiring, others curious. In science class, she sat at the front of the room, eager to learn. Mrs. Cartwright was an older woman, stern and no-nonsense, but Imani had always done well in her class. The lesson on cells had just begun when Mrs. Cartwright's voice broke through the quiet hum of the room. "Imani, can I see you for a moment?" Imani stood up, a little surprised. She walked to the front of the class, her heart suddenly racing. Mrs. Cartwright leaned in, her eyes scanning Imani's braids with an expression that was hard to decipher. "Imani," she began, her tone neutral but firm, "your hair is too distracting. It's hard for your classmates to focus with all those colors and patterns." Imani felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't know what to say. Her braids were a part of her, something she'd taken time and care to create. The thought that they could be distracting, especially to others, felt wrong. I don't understand, Mrs. Cartwright," she stammered, trying to make sense of what was happening. "It's just my hair." "I know it's just your hair," Mrs. Cartwright replied, her voice softening just a little, "but it's too much for this environment. You'll have to take it out by the end of the day." Imani's chest tightened. "What do you mean, take it out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid you'll need to remove the braids," Mrs. Cartwright said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If you can't do that, I'll have to take further action." Imani left the classroom with a sinking feeling, her thoughts racing. How could she take out something so intricate? She looked at her braids in the reflection of the window as she passed. They were beautiful. She didn't want to remove them. By the end of the school day, the humiliation was unbearable. Mrs. Cartwright had forced Imani into the restroom, where, with scissors in hand, she cut through the braids, pulling them from Imani's head. It was painful, but even more so was the feeling of being torn apart in such a personal way. The once proud braids were gone, and in their place, Imani was left with a head that was partly shaved. The tears that followed were hot and swift, but she wiped them away, determined not to let anyone see the hurt. Imani walked home in silence, her head lowered as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. The hoodie she wore was pulled tightly over her head, hiding her face from anyone who might look her way. The sounds of the street seemed muffled, distant. The usual chatter of her friends, the laughter, the everyday buzz of life felt far away, as if she were in a different world entirely. She just wanted to be invisible, to fade into the background where no one could see her. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her hands clenched into fists, as if trying to hold on to something, anything, that might remind her of who she was before today. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The braids she had carefully crafted with her mother the night before, the braids that had made her feel proud, were gone. And in their place, she felt empty, like a part of her had been taken away. By the time she reached her front door, the tears that had threatened all day finally started to spill over. But she kept her head down, wiping her eyes quickly as she slipped inside the house. The smell of dinner wafted through the air, but it did little to soothe the ache inside her chest. "Imani," came a voice from the living room. General Brooks, her father, looked up from the newspaper he was reading. His sharp eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance. His gaze flickered to the hoodie pulled too tight, the way she avoided his eyes. He stood up, his military posture instantly taking over. "What happened?" Imani froze, the question piercing through the fog of her emotions. Her father, always so strong and commanding, was now waiting for an answer. But she didn't have one, not a clear one. How could she explain it? How could she put into words the way she felt, the deep, gnawing hurt that had settled in her bones? "Imani," General Brooks said again, his voice softer now, but with a force that demanded an answer. She couldn't hold it in any longer. The dam that had been holding back her emotions cracked, and in an instant, she was crying. The tears flowed freely, a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. She stumbled over her words, struggling to find the right way to express what she was feeling. It was Mrs. Cartwright," Imani managed to choke out between sobs. "She made me feel dirty, like I was wrong for being me." General Brooks took a step forward, his eyes widening at the pain in his daughter's voice. He knew his daughter was strong, that she could handle nearly anything. But hearing her break down like this made his heart ache in a way he hadn't expected. "She said my hair was a distraction," distraction, Imani continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She made me take it out. She cut it, Dad. She cut my hair. I don't understand. I just wanted to be myself. Her father's face hardened, the anger evident in his posture. But Imani didn't see it. All she could see was the disappointment in her own reflection, the reflection that now looked so unfamiliar. The next morning, General Brooks woke up early, his mind set on one thing, making sure that nothing like what had happened to Imani would go unchallenged. He didn't believe in letting injustice slide, not when it affected his family. As he slipped into his military uniform, the creases sharp and the buttons polished, he knew this was more than just a father's protective instinct. It was about righting a wrong. His daughter's pain wasn't something he could ignore. He had to confront it head-on. The sound of his polished boots echoed down the school hallway as he walked through the front doors. The atmosphere immediately changed. It wasn't just that he was dressed in full military uniform, with the weight of his rank visible to anyone who cared to look. It was the presence he commanded. General Brooks wasn't just a man in a suit. He was a figure of authority, and his very presence demanded respect. The front office, usually filled with a hum of activity, froze the moment he stepped inside. The secretary behind the desk looked up, her eyes widening. A few other staff members stopped what they were doing and turned to face him. The usual chatter was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. "I need to speak with Mrs. Cartwright," General Brooks said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to giving orders. The secretary hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do in the face of such an unexpected request. Sir, may I ask?" "No," General Brooks interjected, his gaze steady and unyielding. "I need to speak with her now." The secretary, looking flustered, quickly stood up and motioned for him to follow. As he walked behind her through the hall, he could feel the stares of the staff lingering on him. Their whispers followed in his wake, but he didn't pay them any mind. His focus was solely on the confrontation ahead. When they reached the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Cartwright was standing near the window, looking down at the courtyard. She didn't hear him approach. General Brooks knocked once on the door before pushing it open. The moment Mrs. Cartwright turned and saw him, her face drained of color. She froze. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight of him standing there, tall and commanding in his military uniform. For a moment, there was no sound except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. "General Brooks," Mrs. Cartwright stammered, her voice trembling slightly. I wasn't expecting. What can I do for you?" General Brooks didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm here because of my daughter," he said, his tone steady but sharp. "You know exactly what you did to her yesterday." Mrs. Cartwright's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked from his gaze to the floor, unable to meet his eyes. "Do you think," General Brooks continued, "that it was acceptable to treat her the way you did? To humiliate her in front of her peers?" Mrs. Cartwright's pale face grew even paler, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to compose herself. I didn't mean to. You made her feel like she wasn't welcome here," General Brooks cut her off, "like something about her was wrong." His voice didn't raise, but the power behind his words was unmistakable. "And that is unacceptable." The silence in the principal's office was thick enough to cut through. General Brooks sat tall in one of the stiff chairs, hands folded on the desk in front of him. Across from him sat Mrs. Cartwright, her lips pursed and posture rigid, while Principal Dillard fidgeted with a pen, tapping it softly against a legal pad. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, but even that was overpowered by the tension pulsing in the air. Mrs. Cartwright cleared her throat. "I understand you're upset, General Brooks," she began, trying to sound composed, "but I was simply enforcing school policy. We have clear guidelines about distracting hairstyles." Imani's braids, with their bright colors and complex designs, were disruptive to the learning environment. General Brooks didn't blink. "So you claim it was a matter of policy?" he asked calmly, though his voice carried a quiet edge. She nodded. "Yes, the student handbook outlines what is and isn't acceptable." General Brooks slowly reached into the folder on his lap and pulled out a copy of the student handbook. Its pages were tabbed and highlighted, worn from the early morning hours he'd spent combing through every word. "I read this cover to cover last night," he said, "and nowhere does it say that braids, color, or cultural hairstyles are prohibited." He flipped to a page near the middle. "It states that hairstyles must not interfere with instruction or pose a health or safety risk. Tell me, did my daughter's braids somehow stop you from teaching, or were they just different from what you're used to seeing?" Mrs. Cartwright shifted uncomfortably. "They were noticeable, and students were staring, whispering." "That's not a distraction caused by her hair," General Brooks replied, tone still level. "That's a classroom management issue. You turned her expression of identity into a discipline issue, and then took it upon yourself to humiliate her." Mrs. Cartwright looked to Principal Dillard for support, her confidence visibly draining. Principal Dillard cleared his throat, forcing a weak smile. General Brooks, perhaps this is a misunderstanding, a miscommunication even. We certainly didn't intend to cause harm. A miscommunication? General Brooks repeated, his brow slightly raised. My daughter came home with part of her head shaved. Do you understand what kind of message that sends to a young black girl? That her natural expression of culture is unwelcome here? That someone in power can strip that away without consequence? Dillard's smile faltered. We take these matters seriously. Of course we do. You'll forgive me if that's hard to believe, General Brooks replied coolly, because right now all I've heard are excuses. Mrs. Cartwright remained silent, staring down at her folded hands. The weight of his words settled into the room like a storm cloud, thick and impossible to ignore. I'm not here for comfort, General Brooks said, standing. I'm here for accountability, and I'm not leaving without it. Principal Dillard looked away, swallowing hard. Let's take a moment, he muttered, voice cracking. We'll review everything. General Brooks said nothing more. His silence was louder than any threat. General Brooks didn't sit back down. He stood in the principal's office, calm but unrelenting, as Mrs. Cartwright avoided his eyes and Principal Dillard tried to maintain control of a situation clearly spiraling out of his hands. The silence lingered for a moment too long before Brooks broke it, his voice steady and deliberate. There's something I want to understand, he began. If this is truly about school policy, why is it that only certain students ever seem to violate it? Principal Dillard blinked. I'm not sure I follow. Let me help, Brooks replied, pulling his phone from his pocket. A few swipes later, he turned the screen toward them. These are photos from your school's official website, Spirit Week last semester. Look at them closely. He laid the phone on the desk. There, in high resolution, were smiling faces of students, girls with pink streaks, blue-dyed tips, messy buns decorated with glitter, and curls shaped into elaborate hearts. All of them white, all of them celebrated. These hairstyles, Brooks continued, pointing to the images, are creative, expressive, and clearly not natural by policy standards. Yet none of these students had their hair called a distraction. None were pulled out of class, and certainly none had their heads shaved. Mrs. Cartwright stiffened, her mouth a tight line. Principal Dillard leaned forward, his eyes scanning the photos as if seeing them for the first time. General Brooks, Dillard began, voice quieter now, I assure you, we don't apply policy differently. That's not how we operate. You don't mean to, Brooks said, cutting him off, but intent and impact aren't the same. My daughter was targeted because her hair doesn't fit a narrow standard of what's considered appropriate. A standard that's rooted not in rules, but in bias. Mrs. Cartwright finally spoke. That's not fair. No, Brooks said, his gaze unwavering. What happened to Imani wasn't fair. You stripped a piece of her identity because it made you uncomfortable. Dillard raised his hands as if to calm the air. We've made mistakes, he admitted, but it's possible that this was just a misinterpretation of the policy. Brooks let out a dry breath. Then maybe the problem isn't just the people enforcing the rules. Maybe it's the rules themselves and the silence that surrounds them. The room grew still again. Principal Dillard looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on thin ice. The photos on the desk were undeniable. The double standard they represented could no longer be explained away. I didn't come here for apologies, Brooks added. I came for honesty. Dillard nodded slowly, finally meeting his eyes. We'll review everything thoroughly. Brooks studied him, then picked up his phone without a word. He walked toward the door, pausing only once. I suggest you don't just review, he said. You reflect. And with that, he stepped out, leaving the silence to do the rest. The next morning, Imani sat beside her father in the front office, hoodie pulled low, eyes unreadable. She hadn't said much since they left the meeting the day before. General Brooks had offered to let her stay home, but she refused, not because she was ready to return, but because she wanted to be there when they faced her. Ms. Cartwright will see you now, the secretary said, avoiding eye contact. Imani walked into the meeting room first, back straight, hands clenched. Mrs. Cartwright was already seated, posture stiff, a folder in front of her she hadn't opened. Principal Dillard stood in the corner, arms folded tightly across his chest. Imani, Mrs. Cartwright began, voice light, almost rehearsed. I'd like to offer an apology. I'm sorry for how things unfolded yesterday. It was never my intention to cause you distress. Imani blinked. That was it? No, I was wrong. No, what I did was unacceptable. Just a cold, polished sentence that meant nothing. I didn't ask for your intentions, she said quietly. You made me feel like I wasn't good enough to be seen, like I didn't belong. Mrs. Cartwright cleared her throat. I understand your feelings, but as an educator, I must balance individual expression with the classroom environment. It's complicated. hesitated. No, it's not, Imani replied, her voice stronger now. You didn't see a problem until it was me. General Brooks leaned forward. Is that your apology? A vague acknowledgement followed by a justification. Mrs. Cartwright shifted. We're all here to move forward. I'm not going back to her class, Imani interrupted. I don't trust her. A heavy silence fell over the room. Principal Dillard finally spoke. Given the circumstances and Imani's discomfort, we're willing to offer a temporary reassignment. She can be moved to another science teacher's classroom while we review our internal practices. Temporary? Brooks asked. So what happens when the attention fades and you shuffle her back? We're trying to do what's best for all parties, Dillard said carefully. This allows space for healing and reflection. Imani stared at the table. Healing would have meant accountability. This felt like moving pieces to avoid fixing the board. So she keeps her job. Her record stays clean. And I'm the one who gets moved, Imani said flatly. Dillard nodded once, too quickly. It's a solution. It's a bandage, Brooks muttered. Mrs. Cartwright stood abruptly. I've apologized, she said, voice clipped. I'd like to get back to my students. She left the room without another glance. Imani didn't look up. I'm tired of being the problem just for being me. Principal Dillard let out a slow breath. We'll arrange the class transfer. Brooks placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. We're not done, he said, not to Dillard, but to the space itself. Not even close. And together they walked out, Imani not with her head bowed, but held just a little higher than the day before. The drive home was quiet, but not tense. Imani sat in the passenger seat, arms folded across her chest, eyes on the window as buildings blurred past. General Brooks kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee, glancing at her every so often. The air between them held something unspoken, not avoidance, but something gentler. I was thinking, he said finally, voice low, we could make a stop. Imani didn't respond at first. For what? A place your mom used to talk about, he said. That natural hair salon on Maple. I called ahead. They said they could take you. Imani turned slightly, meeting his eyes. You don't have to do that. I know, he replied, but I want to. The salon was tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, its windows filled with vibrant photos of women with coils, curls, braids, and locks. Inside, the air smelled like coconut oil and lavender. Soft music played, and laughter floated from the back. Imani hesitated at the door. Brooks placed a hand gently on her back. This is your space. I'll wait with you if you want, or I can sit outside. She looked up at him, studying his face for a moment. Stay. A stylist with a kind smile welcomed them and led Imani to the chair. Brooks sat nearby, not hovering, just present. As the stylist ran her fingers through Imani's uneven hair, gently assessing the damage, Brooks stayed quiet. He watched as clumps of hair fell to the floor, remnants of what had been ripped from his daughter not just physically, but emotionally. What are we thinking today, sweetheart? The stylist asked softly. Imani's fingers curled into the armrest. Braids, she said after a beat, but smaller this time, not too tight. Got it, the stylist nodded. We'll bring the beauty back. Brooks smiled faintly. It never left. For the next 2 hours, he sat beside her. Sometimes they talked about school, about her favorite shows, about how her mom used to sing off-key in the kitchen. Other times, they sat in silence. Not awkward silence, but the kind that said, I see you. I'm here. At one point, Imani looked at him and said, you don't get all of it. What it's like, being the only one who looks like me in a room. Brooks nodded. You're right, I don't, but I want to understand. And I'm learning, one day at a time. She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. The braids were coming together now, neat, defined, beautiful, the way they should have been all along. As the stylist tied off the final braid, Brooks reached into his wallet and paid without hesitation. You good? He asked. Imani looked at herself in the mirror, then at him. Yeah, she said. Better. They walked out of the salon together, side by side, not just father and daughter, but something closer. A team, still healing, still learning, but facing the world as one. Imani stood in front of her new classroom door, heart thudding in her chest. The hall was quieter than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her backpack as she took a breath. Her new braids, freshly done and neatly tucked behind her ears, felt like armor, soft but strong. She stepped in slowly. The room fell silent for a moment. A few students glanced up, then quickly looked away. The teacher, a younger woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, walked over. You must be Imani, she said gently. Welcome, I'm Ms. Holbrook. Imani nodded. Hi, there's a seat in the third row by the window, Ms. Holbrook said, gesturing. No pressure today, just ease in. As Imani made her way to the seat, she felt the whispers before she heard them. Soft voices, averted eyes. Not cruel, just curious, careful. She sank into the chair, staring at her desk. She had wanted quiet. Instead, said, she got attention. After class, as the room emptied, a girl with dark curly hair hesitated at Imani's side. "Hey," she said, "just wanted to say thank you." Imani blinked. "For what?" The girl glanced around, lowering her voice. "For not staying quiet. Last year, I had cornrows, and Mrs. Cartwright made me wear a hoodie all week. Said it was too bold. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe I was wrong." Imani's mouth tightened. "You weren't." The girl gave a small smile. "Neither were you." Another student passed her in the hallway later, an older girl, tall, wearing box braids and gold hoops. She didn't stop, but she gave Imani a small nod. Not pity, not sympathy, respect. Each comment, each glance, it built something in Imani. Not quite comfort, not yet, but something like understanding, like solidarity. Still, it was strange. She hadn't asked to be seen this way. A symbol, a story. At lunch, a few students shifted seats to make room for her. She hesitated before sitting down. It wasn't that she didn't want to belong. It was that belonging now came with weight. "Is it weird?" one girl asked as they ate. "Like, all the attention?" Imani shrugged. "Yeah, a little." "Well, you were brave. I don't think I could have done it." Imani didn't know what to say. Brave wasn't what she felt that day. That day, she just felt small, hurt, angry. But maybe bravery wasn't something you felt. It was something people saw in you afterward. Later, in the bathroom mirror, Imani stared at her reflection. Her braids looked flawless, her eyes steadier than the week before. She still felt the scars beneath it all, the sting of humiliation, the ache of being othered. But she also felt something new now. She wasn't alone. She turned away from the mirror, head held high, and walked back toward her next class. Each step forward felt heavy, but it was hers. The school board meeting was held on a rainy Thursday evening. General Brooks arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his pressed uniform, polished boots, and a calm expression that hid the storm inside him. He carried a folder tucked under one arm, organized, tabbed, every document ready. He wasn't there to make threats. He was there to make change. The boardroom smelled of coffee and tension. Seated at a long oak table were members of the school board, some familiar faces from past ceremonies or parades, others he'd only seen in photos. Principal Dillard sat stiffly near the end. Mrs. Cartwright was notably absent. Brooks stood at the podium when called. He looked around the room once, then began. "I'm not here today as an angry father, though I am one. I'm not here demanding punishment. I'm asking for clarity, accountability, and reform." He opened the folder and pulled out several photos, screenshots from the school's website. "Here are students at school events. Notice the variety of hairstyles, curls, braids, colors, all beautiful, but only certain girls are ever told they're distracting. Only certain girls are made to feel wrong." He let that settle before continuing. "When policy is vague, bias fills the gaps. When staff aren't trained, mistakes become harm. What happened to my daughter wasn't just a poor decision. It was the symptom of a larger problem." One board member, a middle-aged woman with glasses, shifted in her seat. "General Brooks, we do have grooming standards. We've tried to maintain consistency." "With respect," he replied, "consistency isn't equity. A rule that's only enforced selectively isn't a rule. It's a weapon." There was a long pause. Another member, younger and newer to the board, cleared his throat. "What do you suggest?" "Mandatory bias training for all staff. Clearer language in your grooming policies that respects cultural hairstyles. And transparency. Parents and students should know what the rules are and that they're fair." Some murmurs followed. Principal Dillard looked visibly uncomfortable, but said nothing. After Brooks sat down, the board went into discussion. Some pushed back, worried about costs, logistics, setting a precedent, but others nodded in agreement. It was clear that something had shifted. Not everyone would accept change easily, but the conversation had started, and that mattered. 2 weeks later, the school released a revised policy. It specifically protected cultural and protective hairstyles, including braids, twists, locks, and afros. The language was clear and direct. No more vague references to professional or distracting. It didn't solve everything, but it was a start. A memo was sent to families outlining the changes. Staff received an invitation to a new training session focused on cultural competency in education. Brooks read it all twice, then folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't smile exactly, but something in his shoulders relaxed. This wasn't about vengeance. It never had been. It was about dignity. For Imani, for every child like her. Quiet change, hard-earned, but real. The school gym buzzed with chatter and excitement. Tables lined the perimeter, each hosted by a professional in uniform or blazer, their names on small placards: firefighter, nurse, architect, small business owner. It was career day, an annual event meant to inspire, but this year felt different. General Brooks stood near the back, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room. He'd He'd been invited as a last-minute addition after one teacher suggested it would mean something to the students. No podium this time, just a folding chair and a humble name tag that read, Lieutenant General Marcus Brooks, retired. He didn't come in to make a scene, but when he stepped up to speak, the noise faded like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Imani sat in the front row, surrounded by classmates. Her shoulders were square, posture tall. Her hair, freshly braided and adorned with subtle gold cuffs, glinted under the gym's overhead lights. No hoodies, no hiding, just Imani exactly as she chose to be. Good morning, Brooks began, voice steady, not loud but clear. When most people think of a general, they picture someone shouting orders, making battle plans. That's part of it. But leadership, he paused, eyes sweeping the room. Real leadership is about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. A few heads nodded. One teacher folded their arms thoughtfully. I've led missions overseas, he continued. I've faced danger most folks will never see. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has tested me more than standing still while my daughter cried in our kitchen, telling me someone made her feel like she didn't belong. That broke me in a way the battlefield never could. Imani blinked quickly but didn't look away. Brooks held up a hand. But here's the thing. When someone does something wrong, you don't always need to shout. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show up prepared, informed, and unshakable. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with truth, with presence, with action. He paused again, letting the words land. Being a leader isn't about rank. It's about responsibility. It's about using your voice when it would be easier to stay quiet. And it's about lifting others, even when no one's watching. A hush lingered after he finished. Then, slowly, students began clapping, first in pockets, then in waves. Some teachers stood. Even Principal Dillard gave a respectful nod. Imani's smile was small, but radiant. She didn't need to say a word. After the event, students came up to ask questions, not just about the military, but about standing up for others, for themselves. Brooks answered every one. He didn't want applause. He wanted understanding. And as he glanced back at Imani one last time, her chin high, hair shimmering like armor, he knew one thing for sure. She had already become a leader in her own right. If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe and turn on notification button. Thanks for watching.